And welcome to this edition of Hidden History, Stories from the Secret City. I'm Keith McDaniel, along with my co-host, Ray Smith. Good morning, Ray.
Hi, Keith. How are you on this snowy morning?
I'm good. I tell you, it's been a while since we had 4, 5, 6 inches of snow in mid-March. I don't know that I can remember the last time, but this is certainly the biggest snow we've had this season.
Well, this season for several years, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Ray, why don't you introduce our guest? I'm sure most of the people that are watching this already know our guest, but
yes, I'm sure that's the case, and we're glad to have Pat Postma with us today. And the thing, Pat and I are work together on a number of initiatives in Oak Ridge, and I've observed that anything she gets involved with is going to be successful because she's had several successes over the years in helping Oak Ridge, and we want to talk about some of those as we go through with her today. But Pat, we're really glad to have you here, and appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning.
My pleasure, and I appreciate the fact that you are recording histories of Oak Ridge.
Well, thank you. We're doing it in a fun way. Keith and I got this started back when the pandemic first came around. We were going to do a podcast, and then we said, hey, we can't get out and get together. Well, this thing called Zoom's coming along. Let's try that. And it's worked out well for us. We've done them every couple of weeks now. Keith, we're going on 2 years to have done this, and it seemed to be working well.
Well, Pat, I think we're close to 50. We're getting close to 50 episodes that we've done. So,
are these archived at the library?
These are archived on my YouTube page. So you can just go to YouTube, Keith McDaniel, and you'll find all of our hidden histories on there. And Ray has also created a Facebook page for it, I believe. Haven't you, Ray?
Right.
Yes, it's on Hidden History Stories of the Secret City Facebook page, and it's a good thought that you have. We ought to get them included in the oral history archives at the library, and I'll work with them on getting that done. I don't think it'd be a problem at all. So let's start, Pat, by going way back. All right, you came here or you've been in Oak Ridge for a long while, early years. You can talk a little about that, and especially we want to come up to the desegregation of the schools. You experienced that, and we'll talk there. But go ahead and start as early as you want to, and talk a little about your actual history of Oak Ridge.
The arrival. My family was in Lexington, Kentucky, at the time the work on Oak Ridge began. And my dad was teaching high school math and science and teaching in the Army Signal Corps. And he was recruited to Oak Ridge and arrived here in July of 1943. I think he had a badge number 700, so he was one of the early ones. And the family came down in September. And we lived in a house at the corner of Fairview in Tennessee, which was in walking distance of Elm Grove. One of the first, if not the first school. And I walked to Oak Ridge, to Elm Grove as a kindergartner. I think Oak Ridge had the first kindergartens in the South, probably. But I try to think, what do I remember from being in kindergarten? And I can remember making necklaces out of paper loops. And when I look back on that, I think it's prophetic, because I have a wonderful collection of handmade necklaces from artists around the world. And I never thought of that until today, but it might have been prophetic, who knows. I read in one of the commemorative editions of the Oak Ridger the stories about the first days of school here. And I think you all probably have talked about Alden Blankenship and his superintendency. They recruited him on July the 12th of 1943 and asked him to be in charge of designing the school system here. And Alden had gone back to Columbia Teachers College to get a PhD because he thought education was all wrong. And he thought there was a better way to teach. So I guess the idea of being in charge of designing your school system was irresistible to him, because they gave him 4 hours to make up his mind. And I wondered if they told him on July the 12th and said, we want the school system to start on October 1st. Did they tell him there wasn't any school system? There weren't any schools. But anyway, I always say the education in Oak Ridge was radical as the science for the time it was. And it's a legacy that we enjoy today, and we're as good as we are because of what happened in 1943. And one thing to comment here too for 1943 is every teacher that was recruited to be in the Oak Ridge school system had a master's degree. And if you think about how few people even got to go to college in 1943, that is a remarkable thing. My dad worked at Y12 as an electronics supervisor until after the war, and elected to go back to teaching. And 2 days after he quit at Y12, he started at Oak Ridge High School, but he had to go to UT in the summers to get his master's degree. And I can remember my mother typing the dissertation or the thesis on the card table in the living room, and it was sacred ground. We didn't bump into that. We didn't touch it. We didn't do anything. But I think that's a characteristic that still describes Oak Ridge and is terribly important. You had asked me about the desegregation of the schools. By that time, Dad was the principal of the high school. I was a junior. My sister was a senior then. And I guess I'd start out by saying, having grown up in Oak Ridge and looking back at it now, I know I was terribly ignorant about Scarborough, about the conditions in which those people lived, the fact that spouses couldn't live together and they couldn't have their children here. And I think that was probably true of all of the high school students. If I'd been here that long and didn't know it, I think most of my contemporaries knew very little about those circumstances as well. For most of the time, high school students in Scarborough were bused to high school in Knoxville. But at the time of the desegregation, there was in fact a high school in Scarborough. We had a journalism teacher, I think his name was Reef Waldrop, who understood that what we were about to undertake was of national significance. And the year before we integrated or desegregated, I think is a more accurate word, he assigned 3 students to go to Scarborough and the high school in Scarborough to interview prospective students, those who would be coming to join us at Oak Ridge High School the following year. And that was a series of articles published in the student newspaper that received national awards for what he had the foresight to do. I've tried to contact some of those people and I haven't been able to. I know the leader there has died since then. But we also had assemblies the year before, as my sister reminded me. I don't remember details of those assemblies, but it was preparing us for what we needed to do, preparing our expectations and the expectations of the school as to how we would behave and accept this. And I guess I would say, from the point of view of my home and my friends and my father, that this was the right thing to do, that we wanted it to succeed, and it was really important. We did have a cross burned in our yard one night, and we had some midnight phone calls, and my mother, the protocol was my mother would always answer the phone if it rang late at night. So my dad didn't have to hear these people rant and rave, and they didn't say it to her. So, but on the whole, personally, there was just never any doubt in my mind, nor any of my friends' mind, that this was something that we were going to make work and that it happened. That may be gilding the lily, I don't know, but I do strongly remember how important it was and that we thought it was important to do the right thing. One of my friends recently, one of my classmates told me that she was in charge of talent show that first year after the Scarborough students had joined us. She and another boy, and they wanted some of the Scarborough students to participate in the talent show, and they did convince a couple of them to do so. I think they were singers, but they were wildly well received, and that was just a great event that they participated in, that everybody thought so much of it. One of the stories I read about my dad in one of the newspapers that was published later was that he got a call one day that first year that he needed to come down to the gym, that there were some disturbances there. And when he got there, he found that a number of the white students on the basketball team were doing a sit-down strike, and they weren't going to play with the black students. And I think of my dad always as a very calm person. He never got angry. He was not a punitive person. And according to the report I read, he said to the students, I know this is uncomfortable for you. This is a new situation that we haven't been in before, but you're here to play basketball. And you can either get up and practice, or you can turn in your jerseys. And they all got up and they practiced. And it was just, there are always some people who are uncomfortable, who didn't want to do this. And it was tough. But I'd be the first to say what my perspective is, or the perspective of other students, was totally different from the perspective of the Scarborough students. We didn't then, and we don't now, appreciate the circumstances in which they live. And so while I felt like it went well and it was important to us, my feelings are probably not accurate for a lot of people involved in that. I can remember too that my dad said that he thought it went well, and he commented at some point in something I read about him, that the hardest time he had experienced was when Martin Luther King was killed. And the black students were terribly upset by that, and they didn't want to go to class. So he went out and walked in the halls with them and received some kudos from the students and the faculty for having done that. So you can start it, but the basic problem still exists there. Let's see, anything else I want to say about that? No, I think that's what I
well, you've shared some great insights there, because not only did you live it and can experience that, but your father was right in the middle, very instrumental in making it happen as effectively as it did. And I think it's good that finally, after 65 years, we have given recognition to that event and to those Scarborough 85 appropriately. And as you well know, our storytelling festival, Flatwater Storytelling Festival, this summer is going to feature that story being told by internationally known Sheila Arnold, a storyteller that she's been to Oak Ridge, she's done the research. Has she's spoken with you, I'm sure?
Yes, we did speak on her first visit here, and I went back and looked through my newspaper files and things like that and sent her some things. But she's spoken with many of the Scarborough students as she can. And I think in her mind, what she discovered was there was a secret in the secret city about the ways in which the Black community lived. And I think it's going to be a very special occasion. I encourage everybody to come. That'll be Friday night at the Grove Theater on June the 3rd. And of course, the Storytelling Festival goes on the next day as well. But this is special, especially featuring Sheila Arnold and what she learned from the students who were integrated into the Oak Ridge High School. And I'm really looking forward to hearing her story.
I am too. I think that's going to be a wonderful cap to put on the series of events that we've had over the past couple of years now. to add recognition to it. And you're right. There are aspects to the story that even today we need to learn from. So that's good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your experience there. Now, let's move on to the next topic. Let's talk about the Oak Ridge International Friendship Bell and yours and Herman's involvement there, along with Alvin Weinberg. Start with that, and then we'll bring it all the way up to where it is today and what you've done to get the Peace Pavilion. But go back in your memory to the mid '90s when the 50th anniversary of Oak Ridge and that bell. Okay.
Yeah, I was at that time of our 50th anniversary very involved in setting up a new program in the College of Business. So I wasn't as involved in Oak Ridge activities per se as I am now. But I do remember that there was a committee of 50 people who were designated to decide what we would do to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And it was a very serious effort, and it was an interesting and probably unique experience for a town to sit down and say, who are we? Here's how we started. What do we want to say and what do we want to be? And I think that motto, born of war, living in peace, living in peace and growing through science, was a perfect expression then and now, I hope. Alvin Weinberg thought it was very important for the scientific community to be a part of this peace gesture. And he asked Herman if he would help with the fundraising. And Herman did that and was very committed to it. And while although I was involved at UT, one of the things I did there was to take a class, and I was learning to speak Japanese. It was our own Shigeko Upaluri who was teaching that class. And what do I want to say? Part of that, this was a class for faculty at UT. And part of that was being able to travel to Japan with Shigeko at the end of the trip. And we were lucky enough in 1993 to travel to Japan and to see that molten metal cast for our friendship bell. It was an awesome sight to literally physically see that stream of fire going down into mold that would be our bell. And there was a lovely ceremony. 3 days later, we came back and heard the bell rung for the first time. It was just, as you can tell, I'm still broken up about it. Yeah. How lucky we were that we had Shigeko and the Upaluri family that proposed this, and that Shigeko's connections in Japan were such that they supported it financially, but also in ways like casting the bell and hosting us and having the ceremonies. There were maybe 20 of us on that trip, and we had an experience of a lifetime. As you can remember, I expect, well, one of the things Herman did was, in addition to raising the money, we had to build a pavilion to hang the bell. And we worked with a local architect, John Coddington, who taught at UT but lived in Oak Ridge, to design a wooden structure that was a combination of Tennessee's cantilevered barns and some Japanese motifs in the architecture. And interestingly, I remember Herman telling me that he had asked the people in terms of, or the architect, in terms of the wooden structure, how long this would last. And he was told it was white oak and it would last 200 years. And we were all pleased to hear that. And it was a beautiful building, and up in a different place than it is now for those listeners who haven't seen it in the past. Getting that bell and getting it in a position to hang and be rung was extremely controversial. There were veterans who could not see their way to celebrate peace or friendship with the Japanese. not just veterans, but other people who resented that we would do that. There were all kinds of reasons why they insisted it was a religious symbol, and we couldn't put religious symbols on city property, and the city couldn't own it. There were statements that it would be heard 20 miles away, and people wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Any excuse that they could think of. And as a result of that, the city council was very restrictive about ringing the bell. The rules were that you could ring the bell between 6 and 6, maybe 6 to 6:30, a very short period of time. But you had to go to the Civic Center or the city offices and sign up in advance to do that. It was quickly acknowledged that you certainly could not hear that bell 20 miles away. You can't even hear it 2 blocks away, probably. But those rules remained in place for a couple of years. And Herman actually convinced, I believe she was in the 8th grade, Jim Campbell's daughter, to go to city council and ask that those restrictions be removed so that people could ring the bell on their own when they wanted to. And she was successful in doing that. And if I know you've rung it millions of times, Ray, and probably you have too, Keith. It is such a beautiful sound. It is just wonderful. Herman actually got a patent. If he thought that if in fact the city was not able to hang this bell, but that had been so hard worked for and paid for by our student citizens and the Japanese citizens, he realized that you could mount a bell like that on a post in the center of the bell and strike it and it would ring. And he said he got a patent on that. And he said, if we have to, we'll put it in our front yard. But fortunately, that wasn't necessary. And it's a unique, not just a unique feature, but I think it's a very loved, iconic feature of Oak Ridge. We took our grandkids there after they were baptized and rang the bell. I understand there were some weddings there, but it was really a place that most Oak Ridgers were thrilled to have here. And so along with a legacy of education, we have a legacy of statements for peace and supporting peace and seeking peace. And I think that's something that we ought to be really proud of.
Pat, have you found that as time goes on and attitudes are adjusted and to be quite honest, some folks are not with us anymore that were there before, that the acceptance of the bell has become something that's a little more readily available to people? Or do you think there's still issues with it?
I think there's still issues with it based on things that get said on Facebook or other social media from time to time, but I don't think that's significant. Although I will say that we'll probably talk a little bit about do you want me to talk about the restoration of the Peace Bell now, or shall we go ahead and talk about the high school? But what
I do. Yeah, I want us to go ahead with the bell first and finish what happened. The white oak that was to last 200 years lasted 20. Tell us about that, what we did to put it in its present location.
Okay, it was 2014, so the bell had actually been hung in its wooden pavilion. I'm thinking it was 1996 when that was dedicated, a few years afterward. But the city in its routine maintenance discovered that the wood had deteriorated. And I think that was an artifact of, first of all, we didn't know it. The bills of material were that we still had at the time were stated to be white oak. But when the engineers assessed the damage and analyzed the situation, it turns out that the wood used was not white oak, but red oak, which has a much shorter lifetime. But also, the beams were pointed at 45 degrees upward in a roof-like gable, and they were exposed ends of the beam. So they absorbed a whole lot of water. I noticed in Santa Fe, where I go off, and that the wooden beams there often have metal caps over the top, and presumably for that reason. But in any case, it was determined to be so dangerous both to the bell and anybody who might be there that we had to take it down. And as happened before, citizens immediately sprang to the rescue, so to speak. The Opulori family, Ram, the son of the Opulori family, was an attorney in Washington. He had worked with an architect there who to accomplish a community project. And he and Shikeko invited the architect to come to Oak Ridge and did that. Ziad Demian with Demian Wilbur Associates loved Oak Ridge and the story of Oak Ridge. And he was very interested in proposing a design. The Parks and Rec Board in Oak Ridge, the Citizens Advisory Committee, was put in charge of supervising the work to be done. Alan Tatum was the chair of that Rec and Parks Advisory Board at the time. And Shigeko and Ram asked me if I would find a place where people who would be willing to donate to the restoration could put their money. And somehow that turned out to be a co-chair with Alan, and I was in charge of raising the money. And I don't really know how that happened, but Alan and I were a great pair. He had all the engineering expertise and the technical skills, and I had a passion about the bell and about Oak Ridge. And so it worked out great. We estimated that the cost would be $750,000. We actually raised $850,000, and we needed every penny of it and more. Ziad visualized this project for himself in terms of combining tradition, in terms of the bell in Japan, with technology, because Oak Ridge is a science and technology place. And the beams that are across the top of the current bell were formed by Oak Ridge National Lab with high density foam, and they were sent to a place in North Carolina, I believe, not South Carolina, I believe it's North Carolina, that made fiberglass boats. And they used the fiberglass to braid around the density, the foam density. And the curves that Ziad designed were not, these beams were not identical. They were meant to vary from beam to beam. And this was a first. Nobody had ever tried this before. So that was a wonderful way to combine the technology there. But we also have 3D printed park benches. The backs of the benches that surround the bell are 3D printed plastics that were created at the National Lab. We tried something new on the bronze plaques that nobody had done before, as far as we know, which was to cut the names of the donors out with a laser cutter, as opposed to embossing them on the traditional bronze things. Ziad's thought too, if you look at the plaza of the bell these days, or when he designed it and now, you'll see that there are arcs of color in the concrete plaza, and there are arcs of sidewalks surrounding the plaza. And Ziad put those there because it represented the ripple effect and the spread of peace around the world. So it was very intentionally designed. It took, I think it was an all-night job for the contractor to get the bell and the plaza and all of the things in place for the dedication day of September of 2018. It was good that we had a dedication day because it had to get done. And I think everyone was just moved. There have been some doubters about the contemporary style, and it wasn't appropriate for Japan. But I think everyone was moved by what it turned out to be. And we had people ring it for the first time. There were long, long lines of people who did that. So it was a success in every way. But I will say it's 2022 now, and we first discovered the problem with the bell in 2014. If I'm doing my math right, that's 8 years. And I'm sorry to say that we still have not finished the bell. And I want to make a point of that. I think we were so relieved that we got it functional and up and dedicated, and that we patted ourselves on the back and walked away. And I want to say that most of the work that was done, all the work that was done virtually were the planning and the organization and the fundraising and the cheerleading by volunteers. The city did many things, of course, physical things, the cranes to put up the beams across the top. But by and large, they were paid for by the funds that we had raised for the bell. And somehow those things that didn't get done by the time we did the dedication never got done. So now in 2022, it's Alan's and my mission we have a punch list of things like for lights that were supposed to be under the bell, corrections on some of the donor plates, signage. If you're there now and you're not from Oak Ridge, there's no way for you to know the significance of the bell and why it's even there. And we have engaged Ziad to design some bollards and we'll write some text. But I hope everybody will join me in saying it's time to finish this bell. We need to raise some more money. I know we can raise some more money. So that's my mission this year, is to get that bell finished.
Well, I applaud you in that. And you know, I participated with you on that advisory committee, and you've done a marvelous job to this point, but it does need to be finished. And I'm sure that we can accomplish that. You've been very successful. Speaking of your successes, and one more thing, back to Keith's point about the controversies associated with the bell and how it's accepted today. Keith, it has become the iconic symbol of Oak Ridge. It's a gathering place for the community. We've seen that recently in opportunities that people have had that want to bring groups together. The bell is where they like to bring them. And it's serving exactly the function that I think was envisioned by putting it in the middle of the flat area there in the middle of A.K. Bissell Park. So I think this has been a very successful transition to make the bell even more the centralized icon of Oak Ridge. So let's move on and cover the next thing that we talked about, and that is the renovation of the high school. Tell us about your involvement there, Pat.
Well, you know, this idea of renovating the high school originated with a dinner party of UT Battelle management, I think. That's what I heard. And having lived in Oak Ridge all these years, like everyone else who've been here a long time, it was kind of a shock to find their view that our science facilities in the high school were out of date and that we needed to continue to attract leading scientists to come here. And we needed a high school that reflected the kinds of science that we wanted to generate in Oak Ridge. And I got to say, I was surprised. But when I went in to visit and look at it, I could understand what they were saying. And I was lucky enough to being put on. We had a lot of committees in terms of how can we get this accomplished. And I was lucky enough to get on the design committee, which was the group of people who worked with both teachers and architects to say, what should the school be like? What do we want in this school? And I can only say that the passion that came from the teachers at the idea that they could say what would make a better classroom for them, whether it had more tables or whether it had a room for team meetings in the corner. It really came across that they were thrilled with this possibility. I just was so excited about the possibility of this. Our federal contractors got behind this immediately, and pledged something like $500,000. Oh, sorry, it was more than that. We needed, I think, in the end, $8 million, and they collectively provided almost $5 million of that. There was a city sales tax referendum to raise the sales tax specifically for funding the schools and that school renovation. And I don't remember, Ray, you may remember the percentage, but I think something like 73% of the people who answered that survey wanted to go forward with the expense of renovating the high school. The design and the organization of this was phenomenal. They went to school while they built the new school around them. It just is amazing to think about. So Herman and I had agreed to be, some of the financing that was available to us was available only if we had matching private funds. And Herman and I had agreed to be the fundraisers for those additional funds we needed. Some years earlier, Herman had been diagnosed with late onset muscular dystrophy. And we struggled, but Herman never complained, and we always found a way to overcome things. But a month after we had agreed to lead the fundraising, he died unexpectedly. I think I was on autopilot, and Ray, you will understand this with what you've been through. Yeah. But I knew it was important, and it was important, and it was important to my family, and it was important to the community. So on autopilot, I said I would do it. And you know, from a personal point of view, I look back and say, it's probably saved me. I had to go out in the community and talk about things. I had to get involved with this. I had to talk to businesses and tell citizens why it was important. And I really think it was a godsend that I was able to do this. We raised from the community, from businesses, from alumni, $3 million. And I think it was something like a year and a half. Now, there were 5-year pledges, but the response was wonderful. And it happened. And I'll never forget the first time I did a walkthrough. I had seen so many drawings and been involved in so many conversations and walk around while they were building. But I'll never forget the walkthrough I did the day it was, quote, finished. The light, the space, the flow, the design just took my breath away. And, you know, I've decided this community can do anything they want to do if they want to do it.
I think you're right. And I think that Alden Blankenship would be proud of the process used and the involvement of the teachers and students as you were doing that work. So a job well done. Actually, the high school has continued to thrive and be among the best school in the nation. And a big piece of that is that renovation that took place.
Oh, yeah.
$58 million into it in all told.
You know, Ray, as I recall, Ray and Pat, you mentioned that the sales tax referendum was in excess of 70%. And as I recall, that was the largest percentage of approval for a sales tax in the state of Tennessee at the time.
I think so. And the other thing I remember too is that across all age brackets, the people who were 80 years old and had no interest, so to speak, in a high school were solidly behind it.
Oh yeah, they realized the importance of what the school system meant to the future of Oak Ridge. So.
Okay, this is good. Pat, let's not forget the Oak Ridge Fund for Achieving Community Excellence. Let's talk about that a little bit, and then let's move on to the most recent thing you're involved with, Wilson Street. So talk about Orpheus just a bit.
Okay. I've lived here, as you know, my entire life, and I have increasingly come to appreciate the privilege of that. The things that started this community, the bond that the community built based on, they knew not what they were doing, but why they were doing it. You think back to the playhouse that got started in 1943 and the orchestra that got started in 1944. They're still here. They're still excellent. And a few years ago, my attorney said to me, you know, it's been a long time since you composed your will. You might want to look it over. And I did. And I had designated some things there for philanthropic. And I said, but what am I doing? My heart is in Oak Ridge. So I talked to some other people, and we decided that we would start a community fund under the umbrella of the East Tennessee Foundation. And I talked to some people. I worked with the East Tennessee Foundation. That organization we are an affiliate of that organization. It covers 25 counties. And at this point, 22 of the 25 counties have their own community funds. They all vary from each other. But they helped us set it up, and we couldn't possibly do this on our own. The investment record they have, the compliance, the legal and tax and other things that you have to have a charitable organization of any scope is just demanding. And one of the things that amazes me, and we have a former Oak Ridger who grew up here, who's been their chief financial officer for all these years. And in the now something like 32 or 35 maybe years, the East Tennessee Foundation has been in existence. The audit report that they have to do annually has not once made a suggestion or a correction. It's the best run organization I've encountered. They have a huge staff, and we have an East Tennessee Foundation representative who is our mentor and attends all of our meetings. And she knows what's going on in 24 other counties who have these funds. And so she can share her wisdom with us. It is an endowment fund. We start out very modestly. But if we get behind this as a town in terms of annual gifts, but more particularly in terms of bequests, it can be a very significant player in Oak Ridge in the future. And our mission is specifically to be engaged with the future. The future will come no matter what we do, but is it the future we want? Is it the best future we could have? So the purpose of the Oak Ridge Fund for Achieving Community Excellence is to get not just the board members thinking about what the future should be, but to engage the community in thinking about who we are again and what we want to be and how we get there. And right now, the last year and a half, we have been talking to groups around town, asking them, if you could do something really significant and leave a legacy for Oak Ridge, what are the top 3 things you could do? And we will continue to do that over time, but we've gotten some really encouraging input, some things that fell into place collectively from the 10 different groups we've talked to, and we're continuing to analyze those. We have given grants. Our first year was our 75th anniversary year, and we gave 3 grants to things that we thought would change the future of that year. That was the Flatwater Tales of Oak Ridge, the Oak Ridge Schools history book that was being published and provided grants to teachers. And when the radio station, WDVX, came to Oak Ridge before COVID and projected and broadcast here once a month, we supported that effort. We have entertained requests for grants about things, but this year we are going to work on putting measurements around our objectives for the future, and letting people know that they can apply for grants, but we will be looking for things that will make a significant difference in the future in Oak Ridge. And the other thing we're trying to do is just get us all engaged in thinking about our town and where we want it to go. We actually had a guest who came one day and he said to us, what do you think it would take to make Oak Ridge a model city? a city that the rest of the world could identify as a place that they should all aspire to. Wow, wouldn't that be something? But you know what? I said before, I think we can do what we want to do. And if we decide we want to do that, we might be able to do it. But we're working a step at a time right now to raise our funds and to engage with the community and get everybody involved in our future. Wilson Street that you asked me about was one of those things. We were lucky in, as our new director of planning and development came into Oak Ridge, had a good bit of experience in the renovation that we're all aware went on in the Market Square area in Knoxville. And he was, in a way, I think, charged to make our aspirations for that downtown area of Oak Ridge real. We had a plan that had involved multi-use buildings and residences and green space, which wasn't able to be brought forward because the company that proposed it from Greenville, South Carolina, was unable to secure the financing for that. And everybody had that vision in their mind, or those people of us who were involved in doing city things, and are disappointed that it didn't happen. So I think Wayne Glacius, who is that director of planning and community development, adopted that wish on our behalf. And he has been very imaginative and engaged many of us and engaged the land bank in the possibilities of getting that multi-use, multi-story area that would be the heart of Oak Ridge in a community gathering place. Wilson Street runs from Rutgers on the east to Tulane on the west, between the municipal building, let's say, and the Marriott, the relatively new Marriott Hotel. So it's been a slow process to figure out how we might do this. We have engaged the community in conversations about that. There was a 3-day charrette in which designers and landscapers were invited. And I know that they designed a vision, not a plan that would be strictly followed, but a vision for how that stretch of Wilson Street could appear and become the heart of the community. It was presented in October of 2019. I know that the Chamber of Commerce, which hosted that meeting, felt like not many people had signed up, but in fact, there was standing room only. And after the presentations, one of the designers there said, I've been to a lot of presentations like this, and I've never been to one where everybody was in favor of what we were talking about. And I think those of us who get involved in city things do feel, my word is transformative. I've used it so much, it's probably disgusting to people. But I think the fact that we could have bars and rooftop bars and boutique retail, cafes, maybe our own bookstore, art gallery, who knows what, on the street level, and have some high-rise condominiums. Now, high-rise in Oak Ridge might be 4 stories or 6. We don't really know, but we are actually coming along surprisingly well, I think, considering that at the end of 2021, which is 2 years after this original vision was proposed, we put out requests for proposals from developers. And we have 5 of the 7 parcels of land that it would take to develop that whole area. So the requests for proposals were for development of the 5 on the easternmost side that we have. And we have 2 developers who are now in the process of proposing what they would do with the property that they have split up there. Mm-hmm. I want to say a word about the land bank and say that it has been instrumental in the mechanics of getting the land and the parcels given. We have 2 more important pieces to buy, and we have gotten consent from maybe a dozen people in Oak Ridge that amounts to about $475,000 in loans they're willing to make to help buy this final 2 properties that will cost about twice that much. Tremendous support in the town for this. And there'll be a meeting next week in which those 2 developers' proposals are formally voted on. And we might see some bulldozers moving some ground in a couple of months, or no, let's say 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is great. That's good, Pat. You have done a really good job of sharing with us today your personal involvement in the city of Oak Ridge and giving us some information about the future that I think folks will be glad to hear. So Keith, I think we've put a wrap on this one.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you, Pat, so much. And Ray, we've got some other folks scheduled in a couple of weeks. Who are they?
Well, we've got the people who are a big part of the Flatwater Tale Storytelling Festival, one of the most successful efforts in the storytelling world that exists today. And Emily and Charlie Jernigan will be talking to us about that, and also Charlie's involvement with the land bank. We'll bring some of that out too. So he showed a lot of leadership there, and Emily's involved in many things around town in the Rotary clubs, and it'll be a fun conversation with Emily and Charlie Jernigan next time.
All right. Well, very good. Well, thank you again, Pat. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Ray, thank you. And folks, thanks for watching. We'll see you back here in a couple of weeks.